Armor, armor, armor. Many builds out there, especially ground-based builds for the most part, this is something that always hangs on the back of the builder's mind. The capability to withstand enemy fire is something desired by tanks, ships, armored cars, you name it. Some just spam a bunch of blocks and call that a day, just like this example right here. But I shall show you many ways in which you can make armor and the benefits of all of these different models. And I absolutely guarantee that you are going to find something useful and learn something new today. So buckle up, let's get started. Now, what defines armor? Armor is something you work into a vehicle's structure to make it more able to withstand fire. Good armor, of course, is the one that resists the most of that fire and that leaves internal functional organs of the vehicle protected from outside threats. The key point of good armor is to be able to not collapse for as long as possible and leave the interior of the vehicle untouched for as long as possible, leaving minimal room for internal damage that could take out the vehicle. No one wants their engines to be taken out or their seat blown up. The internal compartment of a vehicle being destroyed is always a KO. So, the priorities of a good set of armor are to be able to withstand fire, able to not collapse, and able to leave as few gaps as possible behind. As you may notice on these pictures, there is an option of a good armor set and a bad armor set. The good armor set resists the strike and leaves no gaps. A bad armor set is the one that only takes one strike but already leaves your compartments completely exposed. I have prepared 5 types of armor to test here, each built in the front of these larger boxes. They are all fit and cover the same area and are connected to identical structures that form the boxes. Inside these structures, there is Pedro. Say hi to Pedro. He's going to be over in each one of these boxes, and he's going to be our test dummy, simulating just how well these armor types will protect the insides of a vehicle. There's a seat inside of Pedro, and if the interior of the vehicle is damaged, we will know because Pedro is going to be suffering to death. Very rough way to put it, but it's going to be a very direct correlation between his protection and the effectiveness of each one of these armor types. I hope he knows that I'm doing this just to find the best way of protecting him. No hard feelings. Among these types of armor, as I have named them, there will be basic steel armor, naval armor, heavy naval armor, shield armor, and composite armor. Basic steel armor, as the name might suggest, is very basic. It is just a good bunch of 2x2x2 blocks all joined together, and it is very common to find out there, and it is the so-called block span. I have seen many players complain about this or say that this is the best way of protecting a vehicle, and it's kind of dumb that it is the best because of how simple it is. We are going to find out if it really is all that great. This is naval armor. It is made of several hull blocks connected together, and its alleged efficiency comes from the fact that hull blocks have a very high HP, which its users claim that makes it very good at resisting against penetration by enemy projectiles. Heavy naval armor is literally the same as naval armor, but with shields added on top in a few layers. And I decided to make these two separately because there are some people that claim that only these are enough, that shields are worthless and that you don't really need to place them right here. So I have decided to make a version with and without shields, with shields, just to test out how much of a significance do they really make. Shield armor right here is armor made of 4x8 blocks, all covered in 2x4 shields, in several layers. As you can see, it does cover this entire line, just as lengthy as the other armor types, and it is supposed to work best due to its combination of high HP shields and blocks. Up last, composite armor, which is very different from all other armor types. Instead of relying on big blocks, for example the naval armor types or even this one, it uses 1x4 blocks, all wired up with 1x2 shields covering this whole thing in several layers as well. And it is a version that I myself have developed not long ago, and it's supposed to have strength in its numbers and ability to absorb impact, instead of just sheer HP, like naval armor. And for the testing of these armor types, I'm going to shoot at Pedro all the kinds of projectiles that we are going to face in a multiplayer game. So, there are missiles, minigun bullets that are going to cover all bullets, cannon shells, and kinetic projectiles that use the strength of a solid projectile to punch holes through armor. They're all going to have similar tests to give us a clear picture of what each armor is good at. And so, with no further ado, let's begin testing. First off, let's pit all armor types against minigun fire, arguably the most common hazard you will meet out there. For this test, I will use one minigun fire at all these blocks, doing few pass-bys with this vehicle unloading everything. Let's see how they go. So as we can see from these tests in steel armor, or just block spam armor, we can say that the minigun absolutely tore through all armor that was protecting Pedro. This poor fella had his face blown off 2 times. The first one, the seat straight up disappearing, while in the second, it was barely hanging on. So I would say that this armor does fail at holding off minigun fire. Naval armor seems to do barely any better than the spam block armor. As we can see, it was also tore through with no issues at all, Pedro even lost his face in the first roll, and in the second run he barely made it. With the entire armor exposed, I would say it is barely a success, just because Pedro actually survived the second time. Heavy naval armor, on the other hand, was much more efficient at keeping Pedro safe. As we can see, there was penetration both times, however, he did seem to take no damage whatsoever. There's still some negative points to the fact that the armor collapsed and left a gaping hole to the inner sides of it, but Pedro survived. As we can see, the shield armor was able to resist very well to the minigun. No penetration was achieved whatsoever, and Pedro is completely safe. Composite armor does an even better job. As we can see, not even the first layer of defense was broken with these two run-bys. Pedro had a really comfy time this time around. Up next, missile fire. Also very commonly used by many vehicles due to its lock-on and ease of use, many times even as a replacement for tank cannons. Let's see how each armor set will do against 6 rockets firing them. 2 at each side and 2 at the center. As we can see, the basic steel armor actually does a very good job at absorbing these blows. The sheer amount of blocks and their HP does seem to be able to keep the rockets at check, and they are not able to penetrate at all. Naval armor also does a very good job at resisting rockets. They all get very damaged, but they are able to avoid any sort of penetration. The heavy naval armor also does seem able to resist the rocket fire with ease. They are not able to achieve direct penetration at all, just like the previous naval armor model. Shield armor was also able to fully hold out against the rockets, only the first layer falling against them at most of the time. Pedro is completely safe in the inside. And yet again, just like against the miniguns, the composite armor is able to fully hold out against the missiles. Not even the first layer falls to them. So Pedro had a very easy time, once again. Up next, cannon fire. Used mostly on ground-based vehicles, it has quite the extra punch when compared to missiles, but no lock-on. The same way as the missile tests, 6 shells shall be fired on a similar fashion. As we can see in both runs, the shield armor or spam block armor has a very difficult time hanging on. The armor is completely collapsed both times, and Pedro was really hurt. Naval armor, too, completely failed at its task. The cannon shells were able to completely pierce through, and Pedro was not whole by the end of it. The added shields barely make a difference in this case. The cannon shells still pierce through like nothing, and Pedro still was not protected by some sort of naval armor again. Shield armor also does fail at protecting Pedro against the onslaught. Maybe I may have set the bar too high in this challenge and I should have reduced the amount of shells. Composite armor is able to resist the fire of the cannon shells, with its last layer never being breached, which means that it is the only armor type that seems to have been able to completely avoid penetration against a tank cannon. Up next, Kinetic shells. If you are not familiar with those, I don't blame you. They are exceedingly rare to find in multiplayer as most players don't use them. However, some do try to make use of them, and thus I shall will make that simulation here too. They use speed and kinetic energy to try to penetrate as much armor as possible, generally being efficient only on close range, but with a few exceptions being good at mid-range. This shell specific right here is powered by 6 pistons with a small spearhead. It has good speed and penetration, and it is along the lines of the most powerful shells vehicles may end up using out there. For this testing, I will shoot one of these at mid-range. To note that in this test, what will be most valued will be the penetration being avoided instead of avoiding a kill, since these wings are not made to kill at all, but instead only to penetrate deep. Against basic steel armor, the shell manages to fully penetrate both times. Although the hole left behind is not all that big, its penetration still does happen, and there's a direct threat to Pendulum right there. Naval armor shows mixed results. It managed to resist the shell wall in the first run, but in the second run it was absolutely demolished. Heavy naval armor, on the other hand, seems to have been able to fully absorb the shell both times. Shield armor was able to protect once, and it fell once. In its first run, it was absolutely collapsed, but in the second run, it seems it was able to absorb it quite well. Composite armor, on the other hand, was able to fully absorb the shell 2 times, with only. We see the way efficiency seems to work here. Now the only question left is, how complexly expensive is each? For players that care for their complexity count, or those that abide by the game's 700 complexity limit, like me, then having that in mind is a great question to have. Composite armor, by far the most efficient out of the bunch here, is incredibly costly. Being made by a union of 1x4 blocks with 1x2 shields all over in layers, it is very costly complexity wise, and it really needs to be used very efficiently and only in core spots that need protection. The naval variants are very cheap. Each of the large blocks cost only 1 complexity, with a bit more added if we have shields in as well. They do also have a caveat of adding buoyancy to the build. Shield armor and steel armor, the block span, can end up having similar costs, although with the efficiency of shield armor over steel armor, it mostly should be at a greater advantage. It is the middle ground in efficiency and complexity cost, being made with 4x8 blocks and 2x4 shields covering it. To me why so many people believe that whole blocks and block spam are the most efficient armor out there, seeing that in multiplayer one of the most common weaponry used are missile systems, which are very easily countered by these two armor types. However, as we can see, miniguns and cannons seem to have a very easy time clearing them out, with miniguns struggling the moment shields get involved, but cannons only ever been reliably stopped by composite armor. As for kinetic projectiles, naval armor with shields and composite armor seem to be the way of most reliably stopping them, with an interesting interaction in between these projectiles and shields that seems to throw them away, which could make it very hard for a projectile to lodge itself in. So, if you struggle against someone using as many blocks as possible for armor, simply use bullets. If they have shields, you can also add in some missiles to help chew through those. Cannons are all around the most effective out of the bunch, while kinetic projectiles, although packing quite a punch each, only have one shot, are hard to aim, and seemingly are not that hard to counter for a weapon that is only effective at close range. There you have it. This was a full rundown of most armor types. I hope to have helped you and shown you something new or useful. This has been Nosferatu, and I see you soon.